So I'm delighted to be here to talk about this because generally people don't want to hear. And so yes, thank you very much, Transition Buxton. And I'm delighted to be appearing as part of the Fringe as well. How exciting is that? That's marvellous. Right, so I will attempt to do this screen sharing block and see how it goes. Here we go, I think. Just got to try and minimize a few things now. Hang on a moment. Oh, I've got, oh dear, dear, dear. I wanted to do something else and I haven't done it yet. Just, oh, here we go. That's what I want. Right, now hopefully you can see my screen, but you can't see me, which is just as well. Okay, so my beef with beef. And to be fair, it's not actually just beef, it's the whole of animal agriculture. As you can see from the picture, the fruits and vegetables look so bright and vibrant. And my husband, Charles, who you might have just met, we absolutely love our food. And at the end of the day, by becoming plant-based, there hasn't been any noticeable loss of fabulous food. In fact, making the change really hasn't been an austerity. In fact, it's been quite the opposite. About 8 years ago, when we lived in Buckinghamshire, down south, we lived in a small village called Penn Street. And Charles and a couple of pals in the village decided to keep some pigs. They were Oxford Sandian Blacks and incredibly cute. And even then, back in 2012, we were very interested in the provenance of food. And in fact, years before that, when we lived in Ealing, I trekked all over trying to find an outlet for the Real Meat Company. And people in the village said, oh, aren't you upset about these pigs, you know, ending up on plates? And to tell you the truth, it really didn't bother me at that time, the thought of eating these pigs. I mean, I just didn't feel emotionally involved. I was quite happy for them to grow up, have a nice field to play in, and they did like playing football, I have to say. And after a relatively long life, for pigs that is, they were popped off to the butchers. But in those days, I was of a different mindset and it didn't really affect me. However, we were also very interested in vegetables. And part of this interest in food and the quality of it led me to sign up to a weekly Riverford box of organic veg. And at the same time, we were keen on things like the Soil Association as well. One of the particular things that I really like about Riverford, because we're still subscribing to them, is that they're an incredibly ethical company. Riverford is now owned by the staff, which for years has been a dream cherished by Guy Watson, the chap who set it up in the first place. As a business, they scrutinise their environmental impact from transport to packaging, and they constantly strive to improve, and they treat their suppliers with fairness and integrity. And you can probably tell I really like them a lot. So, as interested in vegetables, which we were, when an installation called Incredibles, which had a capital E to make it edibles, when it came up at Kew Gardens, we made a special visit to see it. Unfortunately, I can't find any of my photos from this time, but this is the sort of thing. They had ornamental beds, like parterres, that were outside the huge glass house. They filled a vast area, and they were filled with all sorts of crops. And they looked almost like flower beds, with taller plants like sweet corn and broad beans in the centre, and there were mixed borders of things like fruiting chili peppers and Lollo Rosso and stuff like that. It was really imaginative, and we absolutely loved it. And I'm devastated I can't find the real photos of it. I've even looked online for publicity stuff about it, but it was quite a while ago. While we were there were a couple of women chatting at the side of us. And one, well, they were talking to each other and like, oh, what's that? Oh, yes, that's beetroot, isn't it? Oh, but what's that thing? And they were sort of pointing at this alien-looking plant with tentacles. And she said, you know, what on earth is that? The other woman replied, I've no idea, never seen one before. And I was so impressed because my darling husband confidently and correctly identified it as kohlrabi, and he told them so. And given that the only plants that he can reliably identify are things like tulips and daffodils, although we've now added to the repertoire costas. I mean, I know they're not costas, but it helps him remember. Anyway, in search of the veg and the good life, we popped off down to Dartington, to Totnes, the home of the transition movement. And we went for a forest gardening course with Martin Crawford. And that's him there in the foreground with the check shirt. His garden is wonderful. It's not a tidy garden, I have to say. It's completely, it's a medley of crops all growing haphazardly. There's huge diversity there. The pruning, he just leaves it where he's pruned it, just leaves it to drop. I don't think he doesn't have a compost heap, he just leaves it. So it's untidy, but my goodness me, it's alive. The input is very basic once it's set up, which appeals to us. It's mainly harvesting and cutting things back, or as Martin Crawford enjoyed telling us, watering the trees in his own special way to give them a nitrogen fix from time to time. And I think Charles was quite taken with that idea, but I have to say, I don't think it would please the neighbours. This is the book that Martin created. It's one of his many books, actually, and it's fascinating reading. All sorts of plants, how to use them, how to grow them. And the interesting thing is that there are 300,000 edible plant species, which with the right preparation, we can eat. And we only tend to eat about 200. So I think agroforestry, which is what Martin Crawford practices, is definitely the way forward. It does away with the idea of monocultures, because we all know that diversity helps with resilience. Anyway, times pass, and talking of diversity, our son Andrew married a lovely girl called Meha, who happens to be Indian. And she comes from a Hindu vegetarian family, a lifelong vegetarian, of course. And now they have two beautiful little boys, our grandsons. And so their whole family is vegetarian. And of course, when they come to visit us, we eat vegetarian food because it's the most sensible thing to do and it's easy enough to do. We moved to Buxton. And as they were coming up for Christmas, we'd ordered a very large veg box from Riverford. In fact, I think it might have been 2 very large boxes. And I discovered that the Vegetarian Society is actually based in Altrincham, which is not that far away. So when the opportunity came up to go to the vegetarian school to do a cookery course, I thought it was the perfect opportunity to brush up my skills and get ready for Christmas. And it was lovely. The food was delicious And I enjoyed the workshop so much, I went back for a few more courses, including this one, which was Flavours of the Caribbean. So that added to my repertoire as well. And also at that time, I thought, well, you know, it doesn't seem that difficult being vegetarian. You know, I think I'll give it a go. So I wondered about signing up for Veganuary, which is, as it says, a charity inspiring people to try being vegan for January and hoping that you might be encouraged to carry on for the rest of the year, of course. Well, each year, year on year, there are more and more people taking part in Veganuary. And it turned out that this last January, 2020, 400,000 people had signed up for the month. And that number of people was estimated to represent the CO2 equivalent of 450,000 flights and the lives of more than 1 million animals. I mean, what a wonderful thing to have a go at. Of course, the way most animals are farmed these days is through the factory farm system and mega farms based on the US model. And there are a lot of them. I mean, you might think it's just the US, but it isn't. I mean, it's all over the UK now as well. In the interests of efficiency of cheap meat, but actually you do wonder about the cheapness of meat because, in fact, you've got to offset that against the true cost, which includes environmental destruction, lagoons of slurry seeping to places, must be hell for local residents, and the overuse of antibiotics, which is a real concern. I mean, farming uses a lot of unnecessary antibiotics because they're given prophylactically, whether the animal's ill or not. And that's to make up for poor, overcrowded, filthy living conditions. And then, of course, we eat them and we're stuck with antibiotic-resistant bacteria. So it's really a false economy, I think. One of the things that I discovered is something called the Animal Clock, and it's an amazing website. It's called animalclock.org, if you fancy going to it, and it clocks up the number of animals that are killed from the beginning of January through to whatever date it is that you visit the website. And it is, I have to say, only based on American consumption. So the figures that you're seeing are only for America, not the world, not Europe. But the numbers are so huge that I can't even get my mouth around them. You know, I don't know where to start describing the huge number because there are so many zeros. But to put this in perspective, because we can't really visualize so vast a figure, during World War II, which was, let's face it, the deadliest conflict in human history, more than 60 million people were killed over 6 years. So that's a period of 6 years, and it was 60 million people. But it's shocking to note that the same number of animals, that's 60 million, die in support of the American food supply every 10 hours. I mean, that's extraordinary, isn't it? I mean, the numbers are just unimaginable. So now I'd like to show you a picture of Poppy. This is Poppy, and I saw this picture of Poppy posted by Derbyshire Police last year, I think it was, on Twitter, because someone, I don't know whether they ever caught who it was, but they were going around with an air rifle and had been shooting at cats. There were a whole series of photos of these poor cats, all with their eye missing. It was just the most awful thing. I mean, it completely turned my stomach. The thought that someone was getting pleasure out of hurting an animal. I mean, how weird is that? And then I sort of wonder that if it is actually unnecessary to kill an animal, would you actually do it? Are we eating animals for our pleasure, for our convenience? Because it's not a necessity, but we're actually treating those animals, even though we can't see them, just like this little cat, constantly cutting their throats every day. And I have to say, I do wonder as well about the mental stress of the workers who have to deal with being in that environment. It can't be nice, can it? I mean, does it brutalise them? Does it affect their behaviour out of the workplace? I should imagine it's a really unpleasant place to have to work. And there's probably a good reason why we take a child to a pick your own rather than a slaughterhouse. We came across this rather tongue-in-cheek menu when we were visiting America some years ago. There's a certain ring to it, isn't it? You kill it, we grill it. Anything dead, on bread. However, joking aside, in my experience, if you've ever bumped into something on the road, like a bird or a cat, or anything really, you feel quite ill. You really hate the thought of it. And your first concern is actually for that animal. Have you hurt it? And you tend to rush out and have a look and see if there's anything you can do and whether it's okay. So it's a very odd thing that we don't care about these animals that we kill every day for food. I remember as a child seeing lambs frolicking around in the fields, and friends comment on them quite a lot around here as well, that they see them in the fields and they're just adorable. But as a child, and I really remember this, I think it must be an incredibly early memory, I couldn't believe that the thing called lamb on my plate was the same thing. I felt sure that they had to be different, because you wouldn't eat these cuddly little beings, would you? The little lambs that were taken to farms to stroke and pet. I mean, somehow or other, and it's a pretty clever knack to be able to do it, I seem to have squashed the thought, compartmentalised it, and joined in the cultural blindness that we've all managed to hang on to, which enables you to hold conflicting thoughts in your head. Beautiful animals, let's eat them. I remember one of our daughters wanting to be vegetarian many years ago. Her friends at school were vegetarian. And I soon quashed that idea. I said, no, we're meat eaters, and I'm not going to be cooking different meals for you from the rest of the family. I mean, quite frankly, it was bad enough when my mother came to visit, catering for all her different allergies. But actually now, looking back, I confess I feel really bad about that. I feel quite guilty that I just hadn't made any connections between what I was eating and what the animals were going through. So these are all the different animals that we eat. Red meat. And you'll see that there are pigs there, because I must admit that I never realised that pigs were considered red meat. Probably because when you cook them, their meat looks white, doesn't it? The World Health Organization say that red meat is probably carcinogenic. A link has been observed between consumption and the incidence of cancer. However, the same is not true of processed meat, the likes of bacon, because that does have a very strong connection with colorectal cancer. And you sort of wonder, why on earth would hospitals serve up bacon baps when it's known that they cause cancer? I mean, why would you do that in a place where you're supposed to be healing people and helping them recover? Well, yes, I suppose you might think that bacon baps are delicious. However, when you see the conditions, and it's generally undercover filming, because they don't really want you to see the conditions, when you see those, I think you'd probably find them rather less delicious. And you do sort of wonder whether our eating habits are costing the earth. In fact, there's no wondering about it, they are. Here's the River Wye in Powys, and it's choked by algae. And apparently, according to the local people who were monitoring the river, it's caused by a growing number of chicken farms along its banks. There are large quantities of phosphate-rich chicken excrement flushed into the river and its tributaries. And these thick algal blooms, which thrive on it, are harmful to plants, fish, birds, and other wildlife. There are lagoons of pig slurry as well, polluting not only the waterways, but the air as well. In fact, George Monbiot, in 2015, reported on a dreadful polluting spill of farm slurry from outdoor lagoons, which poured into the River Culm, and that had wiped out almost all the life in the stretch that he explored. And the Environment Agency did nothing about it at all when he reported it. I think there may have been so many cuts to the Environment Agency that they seem to have lost their teeth. But polluters seem to get away with an awful lot. Anyway, I decided definitely to give up meat. All this destruction around me was just too much. So I thought, well, we'll avoid eating meat. It's easy enough to do. There are plenty of other things to eat, aren't there? So I spoke to a good friend about my plans to give up eating meat. And she said, well, Carol, if you're going to give up eating meat, you really ought to give up dairy as well. Dairy, I thought, what's wrong with that? I mean, it doesn't kill the animal, for goodness sake. And as someone once remarked, cows need to be milked, otherwise they die, don't they? We're actually doing them a favour. This is rather in the same vein that one of our daughter's friends thought that only the black and white cows gave milk. I think there are a lot of fallacies around. Anyway, the reason that we get milk, of course, is that cows give birth to baby calves, and they can only produce milk while they're feeding a calf. And that's why, as soon as they've given birth to a calf and in danger of not producing milk, they're immediately impregnated again, because we can't have an interruption in the supply of milk, can we? So instead of living an average 24 years, our cows are worn out by the constant strain on their bodies, and they only manage to live about 4 years. Their hormones go into overdrive when they're pregnant. And of course, their milk is designed to turn a small calf into a very large cow. It goes without saying that we're not cows. And as adults, we certainly don't want to encourage things to grow, like cells in our breasts or prostate. And then you've also got to remember that you're drinking those antibiotics and the pesticides that the cow has consumed over the course of its lifetime. And that baby, I can tell you, it doesn't stick around for very long, because we want the milk, not the calf. The baby is whipped away from its mother very soon after birth, sometimes within the first few hours, and generally killed. I mean, what a waste of a precious little life. And then, of course, there's something called the somatic count. Funny, isn't it? The more you learn, the more you discover there is to learn. Somatic count. What's that all about then, I hear you ask? There's Charles's little animation going in. Anyway, somatic count, I'd no idea there was such a thing. Well, the somatic count refers to the amount of pus, that's P-U-S, pus, that's legally allowed to be present in milk. Because, of course, with all the constant milking, the udders do get infected, and there is pus included in the milk that's drawn off. So you'll be pleased to know that in the UK, the average aims are about 150,000 cells of pus per mil. But that's what they're aiming for, but it usually ends up at 200,000. In the EU, the upper legal limit is 400,000 cells of pus. And this will probably come as no surprise, but in America, it's 750,000 cells per mil. It does get those digestive juices going, doesn't it? Bring on the chlorinated chicken. Anyway, you don't really need dairy for calcium. All these foods include calcium that's bioavailable. And although I know that transition is, apolitical and not religious, however, I have to say that Buddhism now underpins my philosophy of life. And I'd like to read you a quote from the writing of Nichiren Daishonin. And Nichiren was a Japanese Buddhist priest in the 13th century. And he taught that the Lotus Sutra was the teaching for our age. In one of his lessons, I think it was one of his letters actually, about the blessings of the Lotus Sutra, he said, every being from the highest sage on down to the smallest mosquito or gnat holds life to be its most precious possession. To deprive a being of life is to commit the gravest kind of sin. And as I say, this philosophy underpins my life, so I absolutely agree with that. And I don't think that we should go around killing people or animals. So moving on, what about eggs? Surely to goodness, there's nothing untoward about eggs, and surely we can eat them with a clean conscience. I mean, hens lay eggs as a matter of course, and presumably we're doing the hens no injury by eating them, are we? Well, that would be fine if it were not for the fact that animal agriculture has hijacked that as well. And the vast numbers of eggs that are produced that fill our supermarket shelves and are the ingredients in the products we buy come from captive hens kept not always in the conditions you'd hope for. But of course, it's only the females that lay the eggs. So what happens to the male chicks? Well, you might know that in animal agriculture, there's no sentiment involved at all. It's purely economic, and it makes sense to get rid of them. So when these little male chicks emerge, newly hatched from their shells, fluffy and chirrupy and wanting to explore their environment, they somehow find themselves on a conveyor belt heading towards a blender for dispatching. And they're not even dead when that happens. I mean, let's face it, they've only just experienced moments of life, and the next minute they're being blended. It beggars belief, doesn't it? I mean, I can't believe such cruelty is carried out in the name of feeding the nation. It's so horrific. And I thought I'd spare you the image, but it's out there. And I think the only way that we can stop this horrendous, inhumane cruelty is not to buy into it, because it's only the financial aspect that the producers are really interested in. So onto the environment and sustainability. So, according to the Higgs Materials Sustainability Index, leather, it's not biodegradable. I think it's something to do with the tanning process. And wool is twice as harmful as polyester. If every family in the UK ditched one meal of meat a week, it would have the same environmental impact as taking 16 million cars off the road. That's the average amount of CO2 emitted by the typical diets, how they compare. 82% of starving children live in countries where food is fed to animals and then then eaten by Western countries. I think actually it's eaten by Western people, but anyway, let's not quibble. Yes, so 2019, we could sustain ourselves if we turned all the land that was given over to agriculture, animal agriculture, and we grew crops for humans instead of feed grown for the animals. Avoiding meat and dairy is the single biggest way to reduce your impact on Earth. It provides just 18% of calories, but it takes up an inordinate amount of our farmland, 83%. 2018, they say meat and dairy production and consumption must be cut in half by 2050 to avoid dangerous climate change. Well, I think that's way off. I think we need to do something now, not by 2050. 2014, livestock sector, major emitter of greenhouse gases. This is interesting. Of course, all these agro companies, they buy up each other and we end up with food in the hands of very few people. So these 3 meat companies based in America are estimated to have emitted more greenhouse gases in 2016 than the whole of France. 2010, that's quite a while ago, isn't it? Global shift towards a vegan diet is vital to save the world from hunger, fuel poverty, the worst impacts of climate change, which is now galloping on us, isn't it? 2006, that is a long time ago. Urgent action is required to remedy the situation. Well, I don't think we've treated it that urgently, do you? I'm often asked, Carol, where do you get your protein from? As if that's actually a major concern. And I think it's because we can measure protein that people are concerned about getting enough. But in fact, we have too much protein generally in our diets. You never hear of people dying of protein deficiency, do you? As long as they're getting enough calorific intake, they're automatically getting enough protein. However, when people ask me, and they often do, surprisingly, I mean, the number of times, if I could have had a pound for every time someone's asked me, where do you get your protein? I mean, it's a standing joke amongst vegans. Anyway, this cartoon image always comes to mind. Oh, sorry, I've missed myself off a little bit. Sorry, just skipping back to this animal agriculture. People sometimes say that it's soya that causes that, and so they're cutting out soya. But in actual fact, the soya that's grown in that region is mainly GM, and it's unfit for humans to eat. That's arguable actually, but people don't eat it. But it's fed to the animals. Most of the soya grown is fed to animals. It's quite a small amount that's used by vegans. And in fact, a lot of the organic tofu and soya is from Europe. Oh, I haven't finished that, look. Clean meat grown in a lab could be produced with up to 96% lower greenhouse gas emissions. Actually, it doesn't sound terribly appetizing, but I saw a program quite recently on the box, and someone was trying it. It may have even been George Monbiot, now I think of it. Anyway, he thought it tasted quite nice. Going back to the protein business. Here we go. No meat at all. Are you sure you're getting enough protein, says this whacking animal. I mean, really, when you think about it, gorillas and giraffe and elephants, they don't eat meat. They're herbivores. And when I go around for supper or, you know, for any food at a friend's house, they say, well, if you can't eat meat and dairy, what on earth can we give you? So I'd like to just let Maccabee explain what you could give me.
There's callaloo, ackee, sweet potato, yam, banana, and tomato, cabbage, spinach, avocado, chocho, butterbean, and cocoa, courgette, millet, plantain, rice, and peas, and pumpkin, mango, dates, and guava, chickpeas, and cassava, Brussels sprouts, and cauliflower, onion, fennel, and cucumber, plum, pear, and papaya, aubergine, and saya, lime, lentils, and quinoa, wholemeal bread, and wholemeal flour, watercress, and okra, tofu, and sweet pepper, couscous, and carrot, broccoli, and coconut, peaches, apples, apricot, breadfruit, jackfruit, soursop, pistachios, cashews, and almond, walnut, peanut, also pecan, sesame seeds, sunflower, lemon, orange, pineapple, and melon, bogle, wheat and garlic, hijiki and rocket, pakcha and pomegranate, kiwi, corn and turnip, berries, cherries and strawberries, beetroot, grape. See, there's a lot of foods you can eat, you know, and all of them got different vitamins, different minerals, which are really good for your body, you know. And if you eat a well-balanced vegan diet, you don't need anything more.
I love that. I love that by Maccabee. I think I must learn it by heart so that when they ask me the question, I can sort of fill their ear with that lot. Oh dear. Anyway, here's a suggestion for a plate of wholesome food that we can all eat, no matter whether we have a certain religion or none, or whether we're dairy intolerant or allergic to eggs. The most health-giving foods, of course, are those that come without an ingredients list. And doctors don't usually tell us to add more meat to our diets, not that doctors are really trained in nutrition, but they don't ever say, eat more meat. No, what they actually suggest is eat more fibre, eat more fruit and veg. And just as an aside, I've no idea what that rather horrid lump of brown stuff is on that legumes bit. What on earth is that? No idea. Doesn't look terribly appetizing anyway. Anyway, it's perhaps best not to ask what it is. It's important to note, however, that one thing you really do need as a vegan is vitamin B12, and that's up in the little circle on the right. It's made by bacteria found in the soil or in water. But since we wash our vegetables and we generally have chlorine in our water, it does tend to kill it off. Mind you, it also kills off the cholera, so it's not all bad. Lots of people are short of B12, whether you eat meat or not. And particularly if you're not as young as you used to be. So supplement, it's a good idea. I believe now, actually, it's so short, we're so short of it that animal feed is being supplemented with it as well. I think what we need to do is get away from the idea of meat and two veg, with meat as the main act and the veg in a supporting role. We need to think more in the way of vibrant salads, stir fries, chilies, curries, veggie tortillas, burritos, pastas, veggie ramen noodle dishes, jacket potatoes with veggie fillings, or even the humble beans on toast, which is one of Charles's favourite meals. I was recently reading about gut health, and apparently the people with the healthiest guts are those with the most diverse gut microbiome. In fact, in those people who ate over 30 different plant species a week, they had the healthiest bacteria in their microbiome. So if you find yourself wondering about food and how to cook vegan meals, here are some online vegan cooks sharing their recipes. The pair on the left aren't the vegan online cooks. That's a picture of me and my daughter. And we went to a cookery class organised by the Confucius Institute of the University of Manchester. And I'd highly recommend having a look at the cookery courses they provide, although it has to be said, not all of them are plant-based. This day we were cooking something called Buddha Delight, Lo Han Jai, and it was indeed delightful. It was incredibly scrummy. So the names on the right are of people that I regularly check out online. They have wonderful demonstrations on YouTube. So there's the Happy Pair, who, with a play on words, are in fact identical twins, and they're from Ireland. Lovely accents, actually. It's really nice.
Carol, we've been going for 45 minutes now. We need to be rounding up.
Yeah, sorry. Anyway, yes, so those are some of my favourites. And an app like Happy Cow as well. That's invaluable to find places when you're out. The films, these are films that I've found very interesting. Cowspiracy is available on Netflix, and it's fantastic. Game Changers is about athletes becoming vegan. So this, very quickly, is a photograph taken by a friend of mine in Peakdale. And I just want to read a quote by Alice, what's the name now? I've lost it. Hang on a moment. I can't find her name. Anyway, she says, it's from The Colour Purple, Alice Walker, I think it is. The animals of the world exist for their own reasons. They were not made for humans any more than black people were made for white, or women created for men. And it's never actually been easier to become vegan. Peter Egan sums up for me how I feel. It means choosing a less cruel way of life. It defines all the elements of my life. It connects what I believe ethically to how I feel spiritually, to how I function physically. In other words, it makes me whole in my total belief that compassion is the most important engine of our lives. Just finishing, Daisaku Ikeda, my Buddhist mentor, said, "A great human revolution in just a single individual will help achieve a change in the destiny of all humankind." So I am being the change that I want to see, and I hope that you will join me and eat some vibrant food that's alive. That's the end, and I think I'll now click to exit. There we go, I think. Stop sharing. I think at this point, I'll probably have a glass of wine in readiness for joining the pub group.
Get the camera back on, Carol.
Yeah, I will do. Yes, I will. Thank you. Yes, a glass of wine to join the pub group, because of course wine is vegan, isn't it? Isn't it?
Some wine is.
Some, Carol.
I know.
Not all of it is.
Sorry for taking so long. I must have withered.
It was really interesting, Carol, and you had a great flow going. One comment came up in the chat thing that apparently there is a UK specific clock.
Excellent. I'll look out for that.
Look up.
Thank you.
I had a thought while you were speaking about. It's interesting that one of the areas where there's spikes of COVID is around meatpacking plants.
Yes. Well, they're working very close together, aren't they? And
handling the flesh. I haven't heard of anybody getting COVID off of a tomato.
No, exactly. Or indeed it originating in a tomato.
Yes, bringing wild animals out of the wilderness is just evil and wrong anyway. But I also liked that, this series of 3 mini seminars that we're doing at the moment we had biodiversity the last time, and you made a really clear link to that biodiversity when you were speaking, Carol, about the degradation and how we need to use the agricultural space that we have much better to feed even the number of people we've already got, never mind the others that we seem to be breeding. And there's a nice segue to the next one, which is diet in the Anthropocene with Terry Newhall. So much more of an academic look at how we got here and what are the scientific arguments as well. So has anybody else got any other questions? We've got one nice compliment for Carol here. You are the earthling earthling head of your generation. That's lovely.
Can I just say something? Can I just say something? Hi, I'm Sally. I'm one of Carol's friends. And I'd just like to say to Carol that it was really brilliant talk, and at one point brought me to tears. And also, well, it's the animals, like say, in a month's time, I've been vegan 7 years.
Wow.
So it's really, like say, for me, it's the animals. And then obviously I cheered up when I saw Maccabee. But
I have to say, it's actually Sally who I spoke to when I told her I was going to go vegetarian, and Sally put me right.
So yeah, very good. I really enjoyed it, Carol. So yeah, I'm really proud of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so that just leaves me to round up a little bit and to repeat the thank yous that have already been put forward to Carol. That is stepping in over the edge and sharing very openly and honestly with all of us, and I genuinely appreciate that. A couple of things just to let you know, apart from the seminar in a fortnight,